On the 10th of December 2021, a small group of Super Monkey Ball community members published a 14-page long investigative report into the legitimacy of a number of high scores from Jcool 114. Prior to the release of the report, Jcool was considered one of the most prolific players of the SMB series, having set literal scores of impressive scores over the past 11 years, many of which no other player could even come close to competing with. However, the report detailed the most cunning and widespread cheating ever seen in Super Monkey Ball's 20-year-long competitive history, providing irrefutable evidence of foul play across 3 different games and use of multiple cheating methods. Once the report was published, Jcool didn't attempt to refute the evidence. He promptly unlisted his videos of cheated scores and edited the descriptions, effectively admitting to what he had done. He eventually went on to provide a more direct admission and apology to the community, but has since gone back and removed his original statements from the video descriptions. The leaderboards have been completely wiped of all his submissions, and as of making this video, Jcool is indefinitely banned from submitting any future scores to the community leaderboards. In this video, we're going to break down the different cheating methods discussed in the document, as well as how Jcool was ultimately caught out and undeniably proven to have cheated on such a grand scale. The methods he used are all fairly atypical of what's most commonly seen in these kinds of situations, and tailored for Monkey Ball games specifically, so we have a lot to cover. Situations like this shouldn't be seen as an example of how widespread a problem cheating is in competitive gaming, because that's really not the case. The amount of effort and care that was put into the investigation is a demonstration of the love and dedication people have for competitive Monkey Ball, and how important it is to maintain competitive integrity within our community. Now, before I get into the meat and spunk of the video, I want to address something that I anticipate some wise guys in the comments will be eager to bring up. Yes, I am the same person who made a video 3 years ago about how it's nigh on impossible to cheat in Super Monkey Ball, and I still stand by every point I made at the time. The topic of that video specifically was real-time speedruns, or RTAs, of full normal mode difficulties, whereas this video focuses solely on high scores for individual levels, or ILs, which, when it comes to cheating, is a totally different kettle of fish. For starters, high score ILs will always be performed in practice mode, as it gives the player instant access to every floor they have unlocked, as well as an infinite number of attempts with no penalty for deaths. If it wasn't already clear from the term high score ILs, the objective is to achieve the highest score on the selected floor. This is done by collecting bananas where it's optimal to do so, and finishing as quickly as possible. If the floor contains either a green or red warp goal, then it's always worth it to finish in these for extra points. Collecting a single banana will award the player with 100 points, which is equal to the number of points earned from saving exactly 1 second of in-game time, or more likely half a second of in-game time assuming the time bonus was awarded, which will almost always be the case. Each bunch is worth 1,000 points, so is equal to 10 seconds of in-game time, or 5 seconds with the time bonus. This scoring system allows for a lot of potential trade-offs between collecting more bananas or completing the floor more quickly, and has encouraged a lot of variety in strategies and outside-the-box thinking to achieve new records. These strategies can range from easily completable frame grinds to shortcuts so difficult only a few players have had the dedication to pull them off and achieve a top score. The game's practice mode, heavily skill-based gameplay, and seemingly endless possibilities for new strategies make it seem as though the developers specifically designed these features with this type of competition in mind. This idea is corroborated by an inbuilt replay system, allowing the player to save replays of their best runs to a memory card at the press of a button. This prevents the need to capture gigabytes worth of footage of failed attempts, only to have to trim it down to a single successful run. In-game replays were by far the most convenient means of proving a score, and were soon adopted as the game's proof standard, with players sharing their replays online as early as 2002. Unfortunately, as it would turn out, having replays as the accepted proof standard would become both a blessing and a curse. The main issue with the replay system is the result of a banned technique known as rapid pausing. Rapid pausing involves pausing the game rapidly and repeatedly, effectively slowing down gameplay and giving the player a potentially infinite reaction window. This comes with no penalty in Monkey Ball ILs, as pausing the game will stop the timer and hence will have no negative impact on your score. Rapid pausing isn't something that's exclusive to Monkey Ball, and can be used to huge competitive advantage in a variety of games, such as the Superfly microgame in WarioWare. The NES Advantage controller even had a slow motion button that was just programmed to rapid pause and slow the game down. In almost every case where rapid pausing is a feasible technique, it will simply be banned outright due to it rendering competition trivial, and frankly just not being a fun way of playing the game. It's not uncommon for game developers to specifically program the pause menu to prevent rapid pausing from being possible, having precautions such as obscuring the entire screen with the menu, or adding a cooldown between subsequent pauses. The best flaw to demonstrate the effects of rapid pausing in Monkey Ball is Expert 9. E9 is considered a legendary flaw in the eyes of most SMB competitors due to its especially high skill ceiling. The flaw has 5 isolated paths of differing widths, with the player being incentivized to traverse the thinner paths to collect more bananas. The leftmost path is only 0.1 ball units thick, and in my opinion is the single hardest obstacle in any vanilla Monkey Ball game. Completing it at all is a serious accomplishment that some experienced players have never done before, and only a small handful of competitors have really tried to push just how fast they can go on this wire. However, with rapid pausing in the equation, the hardest obstacle in the entire game becomes completable by just about anyone in only a few minutes of trying. The increased reaction time makes stabilizing the monkey considerably easier, and allows for players to react accordingly to salvage attempts that would have otherwise been gonzoned. With a little bit of practice, you can even begin to grind the insides of the curves and complete the path faster than any player ever has without the use of pausing. As you can see, rapid pausing completely trivializes such a challenging and enjoyable flaw. With the technique to be allowed, competition on E9 would no longer be a matter of who was the most skillful at wires, but rather who was the greatest pauser. When rapid pausing was first discovered and revealed in July of 2002, it was expectedly not very well received by the community. SD Kess, one of the top players of the era, told me that he could remember trying it out on the 0.1 path when it was first discovered, and was sickened by how easy it made the level after all the time he had put into his 18,020 score. It was promptly decided that rapid pausing would be banned from high score competition, and the decision on this ruling continues to be upheld today without ever seriously being disputed. Deciding to ban the technique was simple enough, but actually enforcing the ban wouldn't be so straightforward. The problem was that the in-game replay system does not account for any instance the game was paused during the attempt, so a replay of a rapid pause score will still appear as though it was regular gameplay. Occasionally, rapid pausing can be picked up on in a replay by paying close attention to the monkey's movement, and in some cases is comically evident from jerky adjustments along wires that were obviously not performed in real time. However, it can just as easily be completely undetectable, meaning replays were no longer fit to remain the proof standard under the new ruling. To be able to strictly enforce the ban, the proof standard would need to be updated to require a video of the score being performed in practice mode, where pauses, or rather lack thereof, can very clearly be seen. This type of proof is referred to as a live play. A live play was a much bigger ask in 2002 compared to today, given technological limitations and how uncommon it was to own a capture card. Deciding on proof requirements should be about finding the right balance between accessibility and difficulty of cheating, and back then, requiring live plays would have too heavily dampened competition. In fact, replays weren't even a requirement in 2002, and the entire rankings already operated on an honor system. But despite technology advancing over the years and the means of capturing live plays becoming far more accessible and convenient for the player base, the proof requirements saw no change until as recently as May of 2020. For 18 years, cheating was as easy as pausing the game and not telling anyone that you did it. The community was effectively still operating under the same archaic trust system from 2002, and inevitably, people would come along and abuse that trust. Jcool first started competing in 2010 under the username Blitzer, and promptly began claiming impressive scores on some of the most difficult floors in the game. In his very first video of SMB1, titled Epic SMB1 Replays, he can be seen performing a huge edge grind on E7, as well as balancing along the thin, rotating edge of a platform on E45. Two extraordinarily tough strategies that most top players could only ever dream of pulling off. In July of 2011, Jcool claimed a score of 26,506 on E9, a new world record by 84 points. This score would mark only the second time anyone had supposedly achieved a 26k on E9, the first time being the previous record, performed in 2003 by Pack-Attack, who was still considered the game's most prolific player by a wide margin in 2011. Alongside his A11 score, E9 was one of Pack-Attack's crowning achievements that nobody had even come close to touching, so for somebody to come along and apparently rival Pack-Attack's skill on wires was a big deal. It should be noted that, given what we now know about Jcool's scores, it's heavily suspected that Pack-Attack was also a cheater, and all of his scores have been removed from the IL spreadsheet. The genuine E9 world record in 2011 was a score of 22,091, set by Smiling Jack 13 in 2003. In hindsight, it's pretty blindingly obvious that Jcool did not genuinely beat Pack-Attack's E9 score in just his first year of competition, and especially not in just 4.5 hours of trying. But judging from the comments, people were evidently willing to give him the benefit of the doubt at the time, despite their suspicions. These old, blatantly rapid paused replays aren't important to the investigation in the grand scheme of things, but are at least useful in painting a bigger picture. In the years to follow, Jcool's means of cheating would only become more elaborate and more cunning. However, rapid pausing would remain an integral part of the process. The report mainly focuses on a number of scores claims between April and October of 2015, as well as a few scores submitted after them. The April to October timeframe was significant in that it was the 6 months leading up to the creation and release of the world record compilation videos. This was a project that Jcool announced he'd be working on earlier in the year, and as a result, high score competition was far more active than usual from players wanting to set new records to be included in the compilations. It was during these 6 months that Jcool seemingly came into his own, living up to his former username by launching a banana-based blitzkrieg on the Monkey Ball leaderboards. His number of platinum medals for the SMB1 charts rose from an already impressive 28 all the way up to 41, making him the person to finally dethrone Pack Attack from a 13-year-long reign as champion and cementing himself as the top banana of the previous decade. Jcool's most impressive score from this time frame was undoubtedly his 26,902 score on E9, a 396 point improvement over his still standing record from 2011. This time, Jcool went out of his way to provide a live play of his attempt in practice mode, as proof that it was not achieved with rapid pausing. This higher standard of proof was not required of anyone at the time, but if there was ever suspicion of rapid pausing, the player would typically be asked to provide some kind of live play to back up their claimed skill level. This was actually something that had been asked of Jcool multiple times, but he had always refused up to this point. Jcool's only existing live play prior to this was a score of 6,852 on Teapot in Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. Clearly, the Teapot score strategy isn't anywhere near the difficulty of the strategy he used on E9, and Jcool's score had already been totally eclipsed by respected legend Hexgus in 2014. This meant that E9 was the only significant live play of a high score that Jcool had ever provided. Not only was it considered indisputable evidence that this particular score was legitimate, but it also dispelled any doubts people may have had about any of his other scores for which he only provided a replay. Especially so with this being E9 of all floors. Jcool could not have possibly provided a more substantial live play to prove his claimed skill level, so it really held a lot of weight with regard to people trusting him to be a legitimate player. Naturally though, Jcool's E9 score stood out above the rest, and his decision to go the extra mile to provide a live play would ultimately be his undoing.
Suspicion has been activated.
Recent suspicion into Jcool's scores was primarily the result of a renewed interest in the E9 IL, namely from community members Eddie0777 and Ike. After Eddie showed Ike Smiling Jack's 22,091 score, Ike set himself the goal to outdo it. After having put a good few hours into the floor, he was successful in his endeavour, and even went on to push his score a bit further a few weeks later. However, after playing E9 for himself, Ike soon began to second guess the real limits of human ability on the floor, given the huge disparity between Jcool and Pack Attack's scores and what anyone else had been able to achieve thus far. Both Smiling Jack and Ike set their scores using a 3-wire strat, which involves completing the 0.1, 0.2 and 0.3 paths, collecting a total of 220 bananas and accumulating a minimum of 22,000 points. If performed fast enough, some additional score can then be acquired by then finishing in the goal. A common term for this strategy is the 23k strat, as it's possible to complete quickly enough to finish in the goal with over 10 seconds remaining, resulting in a score upwards of 23,000. On average, this would probably require completing the 0.1 path with about 36 seconds remaining. The fastest recorded live play of a 0.1 path completion, excluding Jcool's E9 run, is currently a 44.5 exit by Eddie and was the culmination of around 54 hours spent playing this floor alone. In fact, Eddie has only ever achieved 2.1 path exits at 44 or above in over 100 hours of playing E9. So, if we were to combine Eddie's 44.5.1 exit with the time taken for full speed completions of the 0.2 and 0.3 paths, then we can estimate the theoretical human limit to this strategy being somewhere in the 23.9k range, or rather a finish with 19 seconds remaining. Now, compare this to the strategy that Jcool used to achieve his 26,902 score. This is a slight variation of the 25k strategy, collecting an extra 1,000 points from the 0.3 path at the start, making it the 26k strategy. After collecting the bunch, the player must then complete the point 1 and point 2 paths, obtaining an additional 190 bananas, and doing so quickly enough to then finish in the goal with the time bonus. Since only 2 trips are taken across wires, this also requires the player to at some point clip over the wall in the middle of the floor. So, let's abstractly work out some averages. The 23k strat requires the player to complete 3 paths in at most 50 seconds, meaning on average you'd have about 16.7 seconds per path. On the other hand, the 26k strat has the player complete just 2 paths in a maximum of 30 seconds to achieve the time bonus, which on average is only 15 seconds per path. However, this doesn't at all account for the extra time needed to collect the first bunch and then clip over the wall, which took Jcool about 8 seconds in his run, taking the average down to just 11 seconds per path. Even giving an extra second leeway, assuming the point 2 path was completed at full speed, the strategy still requires a considerably faster point 1 completion than Eddie's 44.5 exit, and if we give this same leeway to the 23k strat, then its point 1 completion window increases to 22.8 seconds. On top of that, Jcool's run finishes 4.5 seconds ahead of time bonus, narrowing down his point 1 window to just 7 seconds. To make completing the point 1 path that quickly even possible, you'd have to aggressively grind the inside of both curves of the wire, which is something that only Jcool and Pack Attack have supposedly ever had the ability to do. Nobody else has ever managed to successfully grind the first curve even a single time without immediately falling out right after. Hopefully that should make it pretty clear that the 26k strat is exponentially more difficult than the 23k strat, and why Ike began to question the authenticity of both Jcool and Pack Attack's claimed scores. Given Jcool's E9 run was a live play, the most straightforward cheating method of saving a rapid pause run as a replay wasn't possible. If the score was illegitimate, then a much more sophisticated cheating method must have been employed to be able to produce a fake live play as proof. This opened the window to potentially finding irrefutable evidence the score had been cheated, had there been some kind of oversight on Jcool's part, resulting in the video containing an anomaly that could only be explained by the footage having been tampered with. The two most likely options for a live play to have been faked would either be attempting to pass off a tasked run as legitimate or through the use of splicing. Though it was first suspected for a long time that Jcool's E9 score was tasked, no signs were ever found that suggested the run was performed on Dolphin, and it was community member Scrap651 who first proposed that the run may have been spliced console footage. Splicing is a common cheating technique most often seen in speedrunning, where separate segments of a run are performed and recorded independently of each other, and later stitched together in editing software to create what appears to be a single continuous speedrun. Typically, clips will be stitched together in places such as level transitions or loading screens, where it's easiest to retain visual and audible continuity. However, community members didn't anticipate splicing being possible for a Monkey Ball IL, since there's no point during gameplay that would allow for a seamless cut in the footage. As I mentioned earlier, I made a video back in 2018 about the various challenges you'd face trying to splice a speedrun of Super Monkey Ball, and how it's effectively impossible to do flawlessly without some serious expertise in video editing. I actually even briefly touched upon the splicing method that turned out to be a viable way of faking an IL live play, but I'll take the time to explain it again here, as I'd only previously considered it in an RTA setting, and it's quite different to traditional splicing methods. Rather than recording segments of the run separately, one continuous clip of a rapid pause attempt would be recorded, then later edited down to remove the pauses from the original video and make it appear as though it was performed legitimately. By taking a look at a frame-by-frame analysis of how the pause menu behaves, we can easily see what makes this visually viable. Here is a freeze frame of an attempt just one frame before the game is paused. Take note of II's position, as well as the display on the timer, 5720. Since 5719 isn't a frame, we should expect to see 5718 on the next frame of gameplay. Advancing to the next frame, the screen is now dimmed and the game is paused. Note there has been no change to II's position or the timer display. As I continue to advance frames, the menu will gradually come into view, until eventually I reach the final frame before the game is unpaused. Now, when I advance another frame, the menu and screen dim disappear immediately, and both II's position and the timer have advanced to the next frame of gameplay, 5718. These distinct transitions between the first and last frames of gameplay can effectively be treated the same way as a level transition or loading screen in a full speedrun, and after removing every frame where the game was paused, the video will appear as seamless, unedited gameplay. While this is all that's needed to create a fake live play that's at least visually consistent, tackling the audio is a tougher obstacle, and the reason I wrote off this method in my old video. Though somewhat convoluted, it is possible to maintain consistent audio, and I worked with the investigators to help produce a spliced live play for the report as a proof of concept. The first step was to record a rapid pause live play. We chose to do a fast completion of the point 1 path on E9. We then had to go through the video and individually edit out every single pause. Albeit fairly monotonous, this was by far the easiest part of the whole process. With the pauses now removed, this is what our run looked like. You should clearly have been able to hear the problem with the audio. There were overt remnants of the pause menu sound effect present at every cut, and no continuity in the music, which would be an obvious giveaway if not corrected. The only real solution to this would be to mute the entire clip and completely overhaul the audio track, effectively manually recreating the game audio using rips of individual sound effects and the music. Certain sound effects, such as the ball rolling and monkey noises, would be a nightmarish task to try and convincingly recreate. But in SMB1, there's a simple trick that will do most of the work for you. We made use of a bug in the sound settings menu that completely disables all music across the entire game. This allowed us to record a clean rip of the bulk of the sound effects by watching back our replay with the music disabled. We also used the glitch to capture any additional sound effects that are only present in a live play. Once we had all the sound effects recorded, as well as a clean capture of the music, the final step was to correctly assemble it all in editing. This complete video of our proof of concept run shows where and how we used each different clip to convincingly recreate the game audio. As you can see, this method of cheating is considerably more advanced than most other splicing methods, but this means it's more likely for a cheater to make a mistake. After being subjected to heavy scrutiny from the investigators, Jcool's E9 video was found to have two noteworthy anomalies, one of which would only occur under a very specific circumstance, the other is completely inexplicable in normal gameplay. These mistakes were so slight that they went under the radar of the SMB community for almost 6 years, but were enough to conclude that the run had been doctored using this cheating method. The first issue with the run is the absence of a sound effect right at the start. If you watch a video of a Monkey Ball live play, the first thing you hear will almost always be a trailing menu noise from selecting to retry on the previous attempt. But in Jcool's run, this sound effect is missing. There are a couple of reasons as to why the sound effect might not have been present. The first explanation could be that Jcool didn't pause and retry on his previous attempt. The only circumstances in which this could have happened is if he had died in his previous attempt and proceeded to watch the Fallout replays play out. While this is a possibility, in any normal IL session, the player will retry a bad attempt as soon as it looks as though they're going to fall out. Very occasionally, they may let the deaths play out for whatever reason, but the odds of this happening in Jcool's only live play seem pretty slim. The other explanation is, of course, that Jcool overlooked including this sound effect when assembling the audio for a spliced run. While the absence of this sound effect is certainly enough to raise suspicion, in and of itself, it's not strictly evidence of foul play. The second anomaly occurs right at the start of the instant replay of II going into the goal. If you pay close attention, you might notice something sounds off with II's first scream. If you didn't hear anything wrong, then don't worry. The error is so subtle it's almost impossible to notice even after I just directly told you that there's something awry. To properly understand what the issue is, we need to understand how the game goes about determining these screaming or wavering noises. So, the game has a selection of 7 different wavering noises it could play for II. As long as II is teetering on the edge of a platform, then wavering noises from this selection will constantly play out at random. This is true for both live gameplay and the instant replay. If we look at this figure, this line here is the point the instant replay begins, and this line is the point where II exits the wire. In the case of most E9 runs, II will be teetering the moment the instant replay begins, so the space between these 2 points is the duration II spends teetering in the instant replay. This means that a set of wavering noises will be played from the moment the instant replay begins until the point II exits the wire, as is represented by the dancing cheese. We can hear this in both of Ike's 22k scores, by listening to the first noise II makes in the instant replay and comparing it with one of the 7 possible wavering noises to see which one it matches. But if we do the same thing with Jcool's replay, there's no match. The sound effect that actually plays is the later part of this sound effect, soon followed by this sound effect. To have a wavering noise cut off like this, the game must have somehow randomly predicted II was about to start teetering and began playing a wavering noise inaudibly prior to the instant replay even starting. The rest of the noise would then become audible once II actually starts teetering, and the following noises would play out as normal. To put it bluntly, this is not at all how the game works and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. This will never happen in normal gameplay, and is definitive proof that Jcool's E9 video was tampered with. With Jcool's only significant live play being proven as fake, the authenticity of all his other records was inevitably brought into question. Jcool had a lot of credibility riding on this score, and if he was willing to invent new cheating methods to create a fake live play, then who knew how far the extent of his cheating truly stretched. Given the rest of his scores only had replays as proofs, then it was impossible for them to have been cheated using the same technique. And as I mentioned previously, rapid pausing isn't something that can be definitively proven from a replay alone. However, the investigators discovered that a number of Jcool's other records had been achieved using a different method of pause cheating, one that could be proven irrefutably from a replay. The technique is known as pause buffering, and may well be something you've already seen if you've watched a Monkey Ball RTA over the past 5 or so years, where it remains a legal strategy. Pause buffering is employed to execute pause strats, each of which will have its own set of inputs and pause frames. Rather than haphazardly spam pauses to extend reaction time, the objective of pause buffering is to very quickly unpause and repause the game to advance gameplay only a few frames at a time. This is necessary to be able to perform the predetermined inputs at the specified pause frames, resulting in some kind of desired outcome if done successfully. If that was a smidgen confusing, then here's an example of me performing a pause strat on Expert 14 from the RTA frame sheet. The strategy begins with an up input, so I want to hold this direction from the beginning of the floor until the first pause frame, 5890. Now that I'm paused on this frame, I want to switch to and hold the next input, up left, before unpausing. I then want to pause the game again at either 5835 or 5833, of which I hit the latter, then switch to the next input, up right, and unpause. I needed to make a slight adjustment at the ends to make it to the goal, but I was successful in completing the strategy and performing the shortcut. As you can see, the pause strat effectively amounts to reducing a difficult strategy down to just a few simple inputs and pause frames that successfully complete it, which will work 100% of the time given the game's deterministic physics engine. The visible in-game timer gives a clear indication of what frame you're paused on, and using both the B and start buttons in succession make it possible to advance the game as little as one frame at a time, and hit multiple consecutive single frame windows. So, if you ever see someone perform a pause strat in Monkey Ball and describe it as frame perfect, it's kind of deceptive in that pause buffering makes it massively easier than what would typically be considered a frame perfect strategy in speedrunning. Pause strats in RTAs can range from hitting a single pause frame for consistent collision to monstrous frame trees that perform absurd shortcuts that would otherwise never be considered RTA viable. And despite pause buffering being a legal strategy in RTAs, it most certainly falls under the ban on pausing to gain an advantage for ILs. If you take a moment to think about how pause frames could be applied to an IL, for one, it won't negatively affect the score whatsoever, since pausing the game will also pause the timer, unlike in an RTA. This means, hypothetically, you could use pause frames to consistently get fast setups for certain strategies with no penalty, or even find a complete set of frames to perform an entire strategy for you, and do so with a higher score than the current record. It also has the potential to be applied equally to any flaw in the game, whereas rapid pausing has its limitations. This is actually the method that I used to cheat a number of scores myself for the 2015 record compilation, so I find it quite funny that both me and Jcool were cheating using the same method in the same time frame. Though this method is somewhat more elaborate than rapid pausing, Once a working frame set has been found, going ahead and beating the record is a menial task. Then all you'd need to do is keep stum about pausing and hope nobody notices anything looks off. By far the biggest drawback to using pause frames, at least for the cheater, is that they run the risk of someone else finding the exact same set of frames they used and producing a perfect facsimile of their replay. Unfortunately, that's a task easier said than done, and trying to reverse engineer Jcool's replays to find the pause strats he used is by far what took up the bulk of the time spent on the investigation. The process boiled down to heaps and heaps of trial and error, painstakingly testing frames, then overlaying it onto Jcool's replay to see if the two synced up. If they didn't, then go back and try another frame or input. This was made even more irksome by the live camera and replay camera not being perfectly identical, so a replay had to be saved for every single tested frame to be able to accurately compare it against Jcool's run. After putting countless hours into laboriously hunting for frames, with a focus on the scores Jcool achieved in the lead up to the record compilation, complete or at least partial matching frame sets were found for the following records: BX1, A26, AX1, E28, E36, EX1 and M8 in Super Monkey Ball, BX1 Conveyors, BX6 Fluctuation, and World 10-6 Labyrinth in Super Monkey Ball 2, as well as A54 Labyrinth, A55 Spiral, and M14 Springmaster in Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. That's 13 more verifiably cheated scores across all three main games in the series, and this is just what the investigators were able to find and include in the report. One of the quirks about this cheating method is that once a frame set has been found, then anyone can verify the original run was cheated by performing the frames for themselves on console. Here is a demonstration of this on M14 Springmaster in Super Monkey Ball Deluxe. I first needed to successfully execute the pause frames. Pause buffering is actually quite annoying on an Xbox controller, but I still managed to hit this 6 frame perfect strat on just my 5th try. After tying the record, I then saved the replay and overlaid it onto Jcool's from his deluxe high score reel. Since there's a lot of waiting at the start, I'll go ahead and sync the two replays at the first frame the carpet comes into view. Bear in mind that, for the replays to be synced up to this point, Jcool would have already had to perform 2 frame perfect control stick adjustments. I'll now start advancing each replay frame by frame to demonstrate just how perfectly the two continue to stay in sync. It is flat out impossible to recreate a replay in this manner unless the exact same inputs were done on every single frame of the run. To recreate the movement of this pause strat on Springmaster, you would have to perform 6 consecutive frame perfect control stick movements. That means performing every direction change in the space of just a single frame, which will be under a 60th of a second given Monkey Ball runs at 60 FPS. This is completely unnecessary in normal play, as there's no advantage to making such sudden directional changes outside of pause strats, and would never happen unless you were specifically attempting to hit the 6 pause frames without pausing, which is effectively impossible for a human to do. Even if we assume for a moment that Jcool did somehow manage to do this, 1, why would he not disclose that, and 2, why would he not provide a live play? To see how absurd and robotic that would actually look, this is literally what Jcool's run would have looked like had he done it in real time with an input display. This is not how anyone plays Monkey Ball. As I near the end of the replay, there was a point where either the matching frame or input wasn't found, or Jcool finished off the strategy freehand. You can already begin to see how big of a desync occurs after just the tiniest discrepancy in movement. This same frame by frame analysis can be applied to every frame set listed on the document, proving that Jcool used them to achieve his supposed records. And that concludes this video. Hopefully you found this breakdown of cheating methods in Monkey Ball high scores interesting and enjoyable to learn about. If you're interested in finding out some more details, then I encourage you to read through the document for some extra information that I didn't include in this video. Cheating scandals like this can do a lot of lasting damage to a community, treating legitimate players with complete disrespect and disregard, and stealing the credit and prestige deserved for their unrecognised records. This is something I came to realise myself, and the reason I came forward about my own cheated scores of my own volition. Just as an example, one of the scores Jcool cheated to beat was Blendra's 12,340 score on E28. Since Jcool submitted his cheated score not even 2 weeks after Blendra achieved his record, he deleted the replay having never captured it in decent quality. As a result, we're left with this video as the only surviving proof of the score, which I'm sure will look great in the upcoming record compilation. We're honestly quite lucky this sort of thing didn't happen for very many scores. I strongly suggest you go and follow some of the top Monkey Ball players, as what some people are capable of achieving is pretty incredible. In particular, Scrap has been active within the community since 2009 and has pushed the first 2 games further than anyone else. Even with both Jcool and Pack Attack's cheated scores still on Cyberscore, Scrap managed to overtake them both and lead the SMB1 medal table, as well as constantly retain his #1 spot on the SMB2 medal table while Jcool was still actively cheating. I'll leave links in the description to a bunch of folks I reckon you should check out. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks for watching everyone. Cheers.